Hey, it worked this time. I can do it in one take today, unless it shuts me off. Anyway, hi, Jeff. Tuesday, breakdown time. I'm Jeff. Going to talk about Sunday's message and some other fun things. Um, I forgot a key thing. Don't go anywhere. Look, I'm back. Didn't take long. This is the book. Actually, this is the workbook. But if you were here Sunday, I got to talk about the scar tissue that makes us effective and suitable for ministry. And I mentioned this book in the sermon, the best leadership book I've ever read. We went through it as a staff. Again, this is the workbook. The actual book is a little smaller, but I don't have any on my shelf because I give them away like candy. This book, I have a whole shelf over here off camera of leadership books, and they're all kind of the 80s and 90s leadership, especially for pastors, which is be more like a business leader and be bold in leadership. And here's how to command respect. And they're all kind of the same thing, manage your time on purpose, be deliberate and visionary. And here's how to communicate a vision. Here's how to cast a vision. Here's how to run a team. Here's how to be in charge. And anyway, Dan Allender, Leading with a Limp, he basically says nonsense. Not that those things, being in charge and building a team and communicating vision, aren't important. But I think he is the one in this book that kind of took the perspective of, no, if you look in scripture, it's usually the weakness, the people who have the most glaring weakness that tend to be used by God. So, for example, Paul talked about the thorn in his side and his flesh that we're going to talk about a little bit today as well. That was in the sermon, or Moses and his stuttering problem, Jacob with the actual limp. That's who this is after. Just going to say hi to everybody. Bernie, Jacob, Marcia, good to have you on. Feel free to chime in with comments, questions. This is totally an open forum. Glad to have you with us. But yeah, the idea of God using broken people to build his kingdom seems to be throughout scripture. And I think that needs to be communicated more often. And certainly Paul is communicating that to the Corinthians because they're hearing from the people who are there that if you're broken, you're a bad leader. And so Paul's writing to them saying, no, that's not how it works. And I have many examples in my life, and I'm going to share some of them with you today on this little half-hour journey we're going to take of being a team player on a multi-staff environment for a church where I wasn't the senior pastor and watching how those senior pastors led. I've been in elder meetings. I've been in lots of different sit-down options and occasions within a church where you clearly have the people who think they're the church boss, and maybe they are because they're the loudest, and they tend to get their way a lot. And you walk into a room with somebody like that, and you hear the whispers like, oh, they're just a really strong leader. And I say, hogwash. Hogwash. No, a strong leader is not somebody who has to have their own way, who pushes people around. That's usually an insecure leader who's compensating by being a conflict creator, which we talked about on Sunday. I think the strong leaders are the ones who embrace their brokenness, who lead from a place of dependence and honesty. A lot of times when we're inviting people to consider being elders, if they say, ooh, you really want me? I don't think I'm cut out for that. That seems like a really hard job. That's actually the worst thing you can say if you don't want to be strongly considered, because that's the person we want, is somebody who realizes I'm overmatched for this, but I'll pray about it. That's actually a really good sign. If we invite somebody to consider being an elder and they're like, I'm so glad you finally got around to me. I've been waiting for this conversation. That's a red flag. People who desire authority typically don't understand what authority really is. And we've talked about this a lot in previous weeks, that authority biblically is not a matter of power. It is a matter of oversight, but it's not a matter of power. It's a matter of liability and responsibility. And that goes back all the way to pre-fall Garden of Eden. In 1 Timothy, Paul connects it to pre-fall creation, that liability is connected to authority. And so usually the people who want power are the loud, boisterous, strong leaders. And I don't think they're strong at all. Again, if you look at Moses, he didn't want the job. He said, I stutter, send somebody else. And God's like, no, that's actually what I'm looking for. Bring your brother along, he can talk. Saul, King Saul, he was the one that all the people said, that looks like a king. That guy looks like a king. He's tall, he's strong. I think that should be our king. And God's like, no. Samuel said, God spoke through Samuel, and Samuel told the people, God's your king. You don't need a human king. Like, no, we need a human king. And Samuel's like, if you have a king like all the other nations, he's going to tax you. He's going to take your sons off to war. He's going to take stuff from your property and your land. And they're like, yeah, that's what we want. And that's the guy we want. And it didn't take long before God said, no, the one you want, I'm going to show you. He's the little shepherd boy because he knows how to shepherd. That's the kind of leader that is the leader that God uses. And I think there's something to that, not just humility, but brokenness that makes us fit for ministry. And so to embrace that instead of pretending it's not there is really important. So that was kind of the theme I wanted to get out. I told my story a little bit of my burnout, breakdown, whatever you want to call it, where I became very well acquainted with mental health issues and anxiety. And I could talk about that for a half hour pretty easily as well. But yeah, want to talk about what you want to hear about. So if you're on and you want to throw something in, I'm happy to pick that up. But the passage we talked about at the end of chapter 11, Paul really details in the suffering he's gone through, where his scar tissue comes from, as a way to essentially prove his resume is better than the quote unquote super apostles in Corinth. And I love how often, as he's retelling that story, he's like, I'm talking like an idiot. I'm talking like a fool. I'm a madman, but you guys seem to like that. So I'm going to talk like that. Just kind of that. It's not even passive aggressive. It's aggressive. But there's such a sarcasm to it all of, well, you let these guys put you back into slavery. You let these guys even smack you around. He's like, I guess I was too weak to do that when I was with you, because that's clearly what you want. So here, let me tell you. And then he goes on, and instead of saying how smart he is, which of course he could. I mean, the guy, Saul of Tarsus, was one of the smartest Pharisees there was, hanging out at the temple. He was trained by Gamaliel. He was trained by one of the big wigs. And but he didn't talk about that. He said, yeah, I'm an Israelite, sure, just like they are. Yeah, but what really sets me apart as somebody who can lead you into following Jesus are the shipwrecks, the beatings, the dangers everywhere I went. And I love that verse that totally gets skipped usually when this is talked about. The anxiety and pressures for all the churches that Paul carried with him everywhere he went. And I think that's how I want to kind of share about my journey, because when I was down and out, and again, it took a good year of my life of just being unable to handle it, unable to manage what really was mental health. I went through all the steps of things I had counseled people. There's an old, Bill Bright is the guy's name. He ran, is it Campus Crusade? Anyway, he ran a big, he was kind of like the leader and designer of a big parachurch ministry. I want to say it was Crusade. Somebody will tell me if I'm wrong, I'm sure. But anyway, he had a phrase, this little illustration he used about a train. And he called it, I don't remember what he called it, but I always called it the fact, faith, feelings train. And I stole it from him. And the idea is you have these three train cars. One says facts, one says faith, one says feeling. And what order do you put those in? And his point was feelings are a terrible engine of the train, but they're a good caboose. What you want to do is have your facts first, then your faith, then the feelings. A lot of people put faith in front of facts, and then it blows up in their face. Facts, faith, feeling. And the idea is, the way I taught it, the way I would summarize it for years, maybe 20 years of ministry, was right thinking leads to right actions, which lead to right feelings. And I taught that a lot. In fact, I ran into a friend that I had pastored when we were in Aurora. I ran into him at a wedding like 10 years later. And he and his wife were telling me, like at this wedding reception, that was the phrase that got him through unemployment. That right thoughts lead to right actions, which lead to right feelings. And if you're not feeling great, the solution isn't to try to feel better, it's to think better. And I taught that for years. And I still think there's something to it. I'm not going to throw Bill Bright under the metaphorical train here, but see what I did there? Anyway, I will say when I was struggling, I couldn't think my way out of it because it wasn't a matter of theology. I had great theology. It wasn't a matter of faith. I had great faith. It wasn't a matter that I wasn't praying hard enough. I didn't know the right verses. I knew what was true about God, about me, about my family, about the church. I didn't struggle with that, but it didn't pull me out of the tailspin. I couldn't think my way out. And that was altogether new to me. And ever since I went through that, I have totally changed how I've helped people through those kind of times. Because for a long time, it's just like, well, use your brain, think your way out of it. Or what I heard from well-meaning friends was it's a matter of willpower. You just need to, bite the bullet, rub some dirt on it, suck it up, put your big boy pants on, go to work, get the stuff done. All those kind of, strength and conditioning coach kind of phrases, which I grew up as an athlete. I grew up on baseball teams and basketball teams and track teams. I know what it's like to be shouted at with those kind of like one more rep, and I can do that. That's how I talk to myself all the time. I've climbed probably a dozen 14ers where it's just willpower. You just go. And I do not struggle with mind over matter. I do not struggle with willpower. I will willpower myself into dangerous situations, like when I tried to climb Long's Peak and got 95% of the way up, and a friend who had summited came back down and watched me come towards him. And he's like, "Jeff, you're done." And I'm like, "No, I'm not. I'm going to summit." He's like, "No, you're not." And we argued for like 10 minutes because I was so in willpower mode. I was going to put myself in grave danger. And my good friend, took him 10 minutes, but he eventually kind of snapped me out of it. So my problem is not theology. My problem is not thinking. My problem is not willpower. So why couldn't I just stop being anxious? Why couldn't I just feel normal? And I didn't have the answer. And the other thing that happens when you're struggling with mental health is it becomes a cyclical, self-fulfilling kind of thing where I would sit there or I would lay there and I would just feel like I am failing as a pastor. I'm failing as a father, and everyone better. But since I can't, I'm letting them down. And it was tough. I'm new to her, and she's a farm girl. She grew up on an actual where you don't think about how you feel. You think, is the sun shining? We got work to do. You just go and you do it, and you don't sit in self-reflection about it. Somebody's got to milk the cows. Somebody's got to get out and do the work. So you just do it, and that is certainly kind of her persona, which I love, the practicality of it and the pragmatism of it, and so there was definitely this gap of understanding of like, how do I help my husband when he's going through this? Because there's no magic just snap out of it. And I guess I'm not sure where I'm going with this. Oh, just helping other people when they're in this mode, it changed my perspective. And I remember talking to a friend of mine about all this. Why can't I just wake up and snap out of it? And Marcia says she's having buffering issues. I'm sorry. YouTube gets really weird. Last week, I lost an entire half hour doing this, so hopefully that'll get fixed for you. Anyway, I was talking to a friend about all of this, and he said, well, if it is something physiological in your brain, why is your brain less physiological than like kidney stones. Like the question being, if somebody says I have kidney stones, everyone is like, ooh, yeah, that's tough. And the only way around it is through it. Man, we will support you. We'll understand. But if you say my adrenal gland isn't working, oh, what emotional trauma do you have from when you were 20 or when you were 12? And it's like, I don't. It's just physiologically something stopped working, that had always worked. Anyway, I got a lot of encouragement from people who didn't know what to say. And anytime somebody's going through something you don't really understand, but you care about those people, it's okay if you say something stupid. I'm getting comments that there's something wrong with my signal. I apologize for that. I don't know if I can kind of reset, but maybe once I'm done, you might be able to watch it all in a clean setup. I don't know, church Wi-Fi. Who knows? YouTube is weird. I'm going to press on. Hopefully, this will be a good recording later. Otherwise, I'll have to do a take two like I did last week. But I was encouraged as I read during those months that way better people than me have dealt with this and did deal with this. Charles Spurgeon, the Prince of Preachers, 19th century British preacher, he would take summers off towards the end of his life and end of his career just to decompress. And he would just go sit by the sea, I don't know, Cliffs of Dover or whatever they have up there on that island. And he would just kind of need that breakdown and rebuild every summer. Jonathan Edwards, one of the greatest preachers who's ever lived, one of the smartest people who's ever lived, he wrote a whole set of essays on the dark night of the soul, the pressure that comes from being a pastor. Abraham Lincoln, his journals and diaries, he talks about it all the time. He struggled with massive depression even before he was president. So thinking of the pressure he had to wear for his time in the Oval Office, I can't even fathom. So that is a long journey to get back to 2 Corinthians 11, where Paul says, not to mention the daily pressures and anxiety I have for the churches. And I read that now and I'm like, yep. And I don't know if too many people really appreciate that. I know I didn't. I'm so sorry, Marcia and Bernie, and anybody else who might be having streaming issues. Thank you for being here, for giving it a try. Anyway, no clarity for several minutes now. Weird. Okay, well, I'm going to press on, and maybe you can watch it double speed later. Anyway, the commonality that this happens to people and other pastors I've known, I realized if I hide it, I'm not gaining anything. And then when you read 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians 11 and 12, and you see what Paul talks about, you realize he didn't hide it either. And he boasted in it. And so I thought, I'm going to boast in it. Anyway, that got us to chapter 12, where he talks about the thorn in his flesh and seeing paradise, the third heaven. Some people think, okay, the heavens above us, like the sky, that's the first heaven. Outer space is the second heaven. The spiritual place where God lives is the third heaven. I don't know if that is true. I don't really see that explained anywhere in the Bible, but the idea that he could see paradise, but then God said you can't talk about it. I wanted to drive that point home because every so often somebody will give me the next heaven tourism book. Sometimes like the huge one with the son of, that like 5-year-old. And I don't know what that person experienced. I'm not trying to discredit anybody. I just wanted to make sure that we as a church don't build our afterlife theology on that kind of thing. So Bernie's asking if I need to reboot. Like I said, I'm going to press through. If I have to redo this, I will. But anyway, I think it's important that the one guy who saw paradise was told he can't talk about it. And because he saw it, he had a thorn for at least while he's writing to the Corinthians. And he asked 3 times for it to be taken away, and God says no. But then also the idea that his thorn was an agent from Satan, a messenger from Satan sent to harass him. I think that's enough of an explanation of what the thorn is. All the debates on, did he have bad eyesight? Did he have a bad back? Did he struggle to speak? I don't see that at all. He's saying this is a spiritual attack that God will not stop so that I can depend on his grace. And maybe that's what happened to me. I don't know. Could be. If it wasn't taken away from Paul, I'm in great company, if that's what it was. And I think that's another piece to the idea that sometimes the answer to prayer is no. And if God says no to Paul, God said no to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, it happens. And if he says no to us, we're in great company. And this idea of healing, we're going to talk about healing this fall when we do a Holy Spirit series. But this idea that people can heal on demand, when Paul couldn't heal on demand his own anxiety and his own stress, I don't see how that works either. I think when God wills something, it'll happen. And if he wills that Paul had a spiritual attack that stayed with him to keep him humble and dependent on God, then that's what happened. And we had that happen to us. I had that happen to me. So I'm going to press through, and hopefully it will be a clean video when it's anyway. So those are some of the thoughts that I had to expand on this idea. But of course, the point isn't my story or even Paul's story. The point is, what is your scar tissue? What is it that you have where you are shown weaker than you want so that God can be shown stronger than you expect? What is it that has happened in your life that has made you weaker than you want so that God can prove himself stronger than you expect? That's really the equation that's going on here. And it's not just for leaders. It's for anybody who's bearing witness to the gospel. You don't have to have this rags to riches, drug abuser to Christian kind of testimony to have something in your life that is weak and broken and dependent and those types of components to your life. So what is that for you? I'm still typing for the people who are watching live. So sorry, everyone. I can't predict what YouTube weirdness might occur. Anyway, yeah, so that is kind of the bulk of what's going on in terms of that passage. This Sunday, we're going to be doing the backyard picnic outdoor service. And actually, the weather, it's not going to be crazy hot. From what we understand, it looks like it'll be a nice, warm but mild morning, and we'll end up doing some great things. We're gonna, Ali and I are working on preaching through John chapter 1, who is Jesus, for that particular service. That's going to be a little outside of our series, but I think a good one for an outdoor service where we might have neighbors coming, and we're going to focus everything on just the nature of Christ this Sunday. Should be good. I heard there's going to be a dunk tank, which I'm afraid I'll have to sit in. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up a little early because we're having the problems. I want to test out if we're having problems bad enough that I need to just redo this. So thank you, everybody who was on. I'm sorry it didn't work out the way we had hoped. Thank you for everybody who watches this later. Hopefully it'll work out for you. And until next time, yeah, we'll see you. Thanks.